What's up, everybody, and welcome to Blue Turnip's Bad Podcast about good music. I'm Kyle,
I'm Brian.
and we are so glad that you're here listening to us today as we talk about the best albums from the year 2001. Well, if you
Woo.
don't know us, we are two-thirds of the rock band Blue Turnip, hence the name Blue Turnip's Bad Podcast about good music. We all play a whole bunch of instruments, but if you were going to bunch me into one instrument, I'd probably play the keyboards and do most of the lead vocals. And Brian?
And I slap the skins, man. I play the drums.
Slap them with the back of the hand.
Yeah. Like it to sound authentic. Acoustic drums.
That's exactly right. Yeah.
Yeah.
And we always mention up front, like, who are these couple of white guys and why are they even talking about what the best music is? So I've got a background in music education, studied classical piano and composition in college, been playing all sorts of genres of music, writing, composing, listening for a long, long time. So I think I know what I'm talking about a little bit.
Oh, absolutely.
What about you, man?
Genius. I grew up playing the drums. I was self-taught. Word on the street is I used to bang on pots and pans a lot. So I got a drum set when I was a little boy. I've been playing ever since. Played in Blue Turnip, played in some church bands and stuff. Like professionally, I was a DJ for several years. So that was a lot of fun. Got to learn about the music biz a little more, and did some songwriting later on in life, and here we are.
Yeah. You're always so modest, but prize-winning DJ, prize-winning multi-genre DJ.
Yeah. That's right, multi-genre. Yeah, I talked about it last week, but I was on a country station for a while, and it was bad. So there's not gonna be any country albums in my top 5 ever.
I do want to mention, you mentioned that our parents told us when you were kids you would bang on pots and pans. I feel like every kid that grows up playing the drums, that's like the story that you always hear. The parents are like, they were smacking stuff, so we like got them something to smack.
Yeah, something that sounds a little more pleasing.
Yeah. Well, you mentioned the country music too, so yeah, one of our listeners last time wrote me and was like, hey, like, why didn't you include NSYNC in your 2000 top 5 albums? And I was like, oh, I'm so sorry, man. I didn't mean to hurt your feelings. But I think NSYNC is doing, at least a couple of guys in NSYNC are doing okay. Like, it'll be all right. But Brian and I both, just with the music that we grew up with, very, very much kind of in the rock music world. It's a pretty eclectic collection. Like we stretched, like last week we stretched into bluegrass a little bit and get into progressive rock a little bit and some indie stuff and some experimental stuff, but most of it kind of tends to be under the larger umbrella of rock music. So if you like rock music, then hopefully you'll like the albums that we have for you today.
Yes.
Well, all right, we're gonna head on right into our first segment, which is just kind of talking about the year 2001. So we're talking about 2001 today. Brian, I know you and I were very, very young. I think this would have been like third grade for me, first grade for you.
First grade.
Yeah. Anything stand out in your mind of like, oh man, 2001, I remember like blah, blah, blah.
Oh man, I don't really remember much.
No, me neither.
I think last week I was talking about just like with like the Beatles was our big band when we were little kids. Just because that's what our parents listened to in the house. So we knew the Beatles a lot. Like I could sing, like Help was my favorite Beatles album growing up because it's basically a sing-along album. Well, for us it was.
Yeah.
But remember we used to sing You're Gonna Lose That Girl?
Oh,
was that the one we used to do?
Yeah.
Like the back and forth thing? Yeah. So I guess my music memories from 2001, mostly Beatles. That's pretty much what I knew. And a lot of like Christian rock music that we started listening to. But yeah, I don't really remember first grade very well, like in general.
Yeah, it's kind of a blank spot in my memory too. I remember third grade a little bit better because I remember my teacher, Miss Coffee, and that was where I got to be pretty good friends with a couple of my like elementary school folks and started to get pretty into baseball, which you and I, but you're wearing your high school baseball shirt today, I see.
Yeah. It's 2011.
Nice.
On this one, yeah.
Nice.
Yeah.
But yeah, you know, same, like Beatles were obviously a huge influence, and like you said, the Christian rock, and we definitely talked about some Christian rock last time, and we'll talk about some Christian rock this time as well. Back in the sort of, you know, we've talked about like 2000 to 2007, 8 is kind of like sort of the golden period for Christian music as far as like creativity and songwriting and good lyrics, and you know, a lot of good music, creative and kind of widespread music came out in that time period for sure.
Yeah, no doubt about it.
Well, sweet. Well, last time we started the ridiculously popular segment of This Year in Blue Turnip History. As we mentioned, Brian and I are in a rock band called Blue Turnip. If you want, you can check out our EP. We've got one EP floating around out there anywhere where music can be found. It's called Songs from the Root Cellar by Blue Turnip, 5 songs. And I think they are pretty dang good, if you ask me.
Yeah.
We may
Nice
even talk
ad.
about.
I like how you slipped that in.
Yeah.
We don't have like real advertisers, so we got to advertise ourselves.
That's exactly right. This podcast is sponsored by the EP from 2017. All right, so yeah, like we mentioned, we were kids, but we started young because we're a family outfit, so we were playing very young, and so we talked about in the last podcast. If you haven't listened to it, you hear the riveting story of our debut performance of playing the Rocky theme at a talent show. And basically, out of that talent show, we got a gig the following year from the same school that we did the talent show through, that they asked if we would play a set for the fall festival. And we were both saying our memories of the set is pretty spotty. But you mentioned the Beatles, and those are the 2 songs that I really remember us playing. Is both you and I took piano lessons when we were kids. And we each had a separate Beatles book. I remember that. I don't know why. I don't know why we each had our own separate.
I think yours is a little more advanced.
Maybe.
Than mine. Yeah. I was right hand only.
But those are the tunes that I remember playing. Was we played 2 Beatles songs. I remember we played Love, Love, Love from the Magical Mystery Tour album. But I remember that our dad, since we were playing at a Christian school, we changed the chorus from Love, Love, Love to God is Love, but left all the other words exactly the same. So get that little plug in there. And then I mentioned earlier too that like kind of like one of the shticks of our band is we all play a whole bunch of instruments and can swap around, you know, when we're playing live. And this is the first time I remember doing that because we were both playing the piano out of the Beatles books, and I remember there was one song where Obla Di Obla Da, where you could play that on the piano, and you swapped over to the piano and played it and sang it, and I went back to the drums. And I think that's the only time I've ever sat on a drum throne on stage in front of people.
This just came back to me. I remember you had your beat that you could play. The one beat like do ga.
That was the
probably didn't fit the song at all.
Probably not.
You probably did it.
We were too young to be mad at each other, but I'm sure if it was like a few years later, we would have been like, "You're ruining the song."
Yeah. Hilarious. But yeah, swapping instruments has always been super fun. I always enjoy it. I mean, I like playing the drums the most because I feel like I'm the best at it. But even on our EP, I tickled the ivories a little bit. Kyle played bass, guitar, keyboard, like everything. So it's fun. It makes the writing process and the live playing just more exciting.
Yeah. So I mean, I'll say too, I know keyboards was the only kind of like pitched instrument that you played on the EP, but you bounced around to so many different percussion instruments too, and that's been such a cool thing about playing with you over the past 5-7 years, especially as you kind of expanded your percussion repertoire and got the cajon, and you got your like additional drum kit attachments, like your tambourine stand, and you played a couple other things too. Did you play some congas on there as well, if I remember?
Yep, I played some congas, some tambourine, some shaker. Yeah, standard stuff. Add a little spice here and there.
Yeah, it adds. I mean, it big time adds, especially if it's mixed well. And we can plug as well the guy who engineered and mixed our EP, Ricky Rodriguez of Baumhaus Studios. He did such an awesome job. Because sometimes you'll like listen to a song, and when the shaker comes in, you're like, all I hear is the shaker. And he did such a great job of layering those different percussion elements in there.
Oh yeah, something Ricky's the man, so shout out to him. But something really cool that he did that I noticed listening through headphones is the way he pans the drums. Like it sounds like you're listening to a live kit. Like your snare and your hi-hat will be primarily on the left. As you cross the toms, it'll go over into the right ear. But he did a really good job with panning. Makes me sound way better than I actually am.
Nah, dude, you're the pro.
Yeah, I guess.
So there you go. We got 2 commercials. Today's podcast sponsored by Songs from the Root Cellar by Blue Turnip and Ricky Rodriguez at Baumhouse Studios in Morganton, North Carolina. So if you ever get a chance to record, he's the guy to do it with, we think.
Yeah, no doubt. The coolest.
I'll say, I mean, while we're talking about him too, I'll say like great environment. Because you can go into a studio and it can be like a super nerve-wracking like, especially if you get an engineer who's like really uppity and like very like, oh, like I know how everything should work and what it should do. And like he had some gentle suggestions for us that really added to a couple of the songs, and he kept a really low key, very like fun, happy environment, and was just like a total pleasure to work with.
Yeah. And he always takes us to this restaurant called Mountain Burrito. So there's our third sponsor.
There you go. Third sponsor brought to you by
Super
Mountain.
Good restaurant. Yeah, Morganton, North Carolina. Check it out. Maybe they'll pay us. Yeah.
Really good restaurant.
So good.
No lie. All right, well, let's get into some tunes. So we've got some rapid fire honorable mentions here. So we talked about in our last podcast how, some of the music from this era, like early 2000s, is maybe like a little bit dated, doesn't hold up quite as well these days as it may have 20 years ago. But nostalgia is a big part of music. I mean, music and memories are so tied together. So a lot of these honorable mentions are sort of like seeped in nostalgia a little bit, but we got some honorable mentions here. The Big Surprise by the Elms. That's the debut album from the rock band The Elms. They hadn't quite found their sound yet, but there's some really, really good songs on there. It's a little bit overproduced, but some really, really cool music in there. The Big Surprise by the Elms. I mentioned a John Hyatt album last week, and I've got one this week as well. The Tiki Bar is Open by John Hyatt. Mentioned that back, especially like 90s, early 2000s, he really was open to experimenting with different genres on different albums. This one's definitely kind of like more in the blues rock / psychedelic rock direction. So a lot of really cool music on The Tiki Bar is Open by John Hyatt. This is a band we actually mentioned last week because we were talking about Linkin Park, and we also ended up talking about P.O.D. Satellite by P.O.D., which is more or less kind of their hit parade. It's got a lot of like really big hits that they did, like Alive, Youth of a Nation, Boom, and some deep tracks that are pretty cool on there as well, but kind of like that early 2000s rap rock in case you're really plugged into there. And then this last one, this is probably the goofiest one, and Brian, you might want to talk about this one a little bit. I threw on Momentum by Toby Mac.
Oh, yeah.
And if you're listening to this and you know Toby Mac, especially from like the last decade or so, you may or may not even know like the old stuff because he's so mainstream pop music now that like if you go back and listen to this album Momentum, it's kind of like electronic scream rap. Would you say?
Yeah, no, I would. And I'm glad you mentioned it because like it's outdated, obviously. But I used to be a massive Toby Mac fan. I bought all of his albums, and he did a remix for every album he made, and I bought all of his remix albums, and they were exactly the same, but just like worse. But yeah, he was like, it was pretty intense. I remember that song. Was that the one with Extreme Days?
Yep.
Extreme. Yeah, it's pretty goofy, but it was fun to listen to.
Yeah.
And that's the one that had the J Train with what's that guy's? Is it Kirk Franklin?
I was gonna say I think Kirk Franklin. Yeah,
that was a cool song.
Yeah, that's a cool one.
Yeah, but I used to jam Toby Mac.
Yeah, man.
Cool. Yeah.
Good stuff, fun stuff. He always put a lot of like goofy, funny stuff on there. It was just like fun to listen to. You could laugh and have a
Yeah.
good time, and yeah, I know
True
we.
Dog and all that
Yeah,
stuff. Yeah.
exactly. And I know we've both seen him live. I've seen him once. Have you seen him more than once?
I actually have never seen him.
Oh, you've never seen him? Yeah, I
Mm-mm.
saw him once at a big conference in Washington D.C. And from what I understand, my wife has seen him a handful of times, and from what I understand, he pretty much puts on the same show every time, but it's like classic. Like,
Yeah.
people are back flipping off of amps and
Nice.
duels between singers and guitarists and lots of like fun stuff for like the audience to engage in.
Nice.
So,
That's
yeah,
cool.
yeah. Well, I do have one more honorable mention, but I'm actually not going to mention it because it is number 5 on Brian's list. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Brian, and he's going to name his number 5 album from the year 2001.
That's right, because it's definitely better than an honorable mention. My number 5 album from 2001 is the Strokes' debut album, Is This It? Woo! It's a good, like, I was talking last week about Coldplay, how their debut album Parachutes was the stepping stone to their next one. I feel like the same way about the Strokes album. You knew this band was going to be cool, and this was such a solid debut. And it's basically just like simple rock and roll. Uh, Classic 4-piece rock band, 2 electric guitar players, a bass player and a drummer, and their singer Julian Casablancas is like a terrible singer, but it works really well for their sound. But I love it. I listened to it. I actually listened to all my albums all the way through in preparation this time, better prepared for round 2. But something I noticed that I really like about them is their 2 electric guitar players, their rhythm and lead guy, work together so freaking good. And the way it's panned and the way they play off of each other, they do some really cool, really simple, but like great mixed guitars. So that was the big takeaway for me on this listen. You got any thoughts about it since it was a honorable mention?
Yeah, man. I think I think you mentioned about the lead vocalist. One thing I really like, and vocal effects don't always do it for me, but I think with his voice and with the sound of the band, they throw that like kind of light distortion on his voice on a lot of their
Yeah,
songs, and it
you're
works
right.
really well. It really adds
Mm-hmm.
to their sound. It's kind of like the instant you hear him start singing, you're like, "This is the Strokes." Like, if you didn't
Mm-hmm.
get it already but
Yeah.
I'll have to go back and listen closer because that interplay between musicians is always so interesting to
Mm-hmm.
me.
They've just got an iconic sound.
Yeah,
Well, their first 2 albums for sure. Then I kind of lost them a little bit, but they came back strong with their most recent one, I thought. Which actually they
nice.
just won a Grammy for best rock album.
All right.
That's pretty cool. But
Sponsored
yeah, it's
sponsored by
just
the Strokes.
yeah, it's just good rock and roll. And you were talking about his vocals. I noticed that his mix his vocals kind of low, which I always found interesting, but it works. They've got the sound. Now, if I had to pick one favorite song, it would probably be Last Night. I think that was probably their biggest hit on the album too. So sorry for picking one that everybody knows. But it's got the intro. It's just one note, but it keeps layering. I'll start with the guitar, then the other guitar, then the bass comes in, and then the vocals come in. That's classic Strokes. As classic Strokes as it gets. So yeah, that's my number 5 pick.
Nice. And speaking of I know you mentioned Last Night. So in case you're listening and you want to hear some of this music, in the description below, we've got a link to a Spotify playlist with all of the tunes or all the albums that we talk about in our top 5. And I know Last Night is one of the Strokes songs that you picked.
That's right. Yep, one of my favorites.
Yeah, we've also got a
And
link to a YouTube playlist in there as well. So if you
yeah,
prefer YouTube, Spotify, that's fine too.
true that. And I'll say this, but this week's a little bit different because we have an album that we picked that's the same but in a different numbered slot. So I'm gonna go ahead and do my number 4, and then my number 3 is the same as your number 5, right?
Before you move on to number 4, I do want to mention just very quickly about that Strokes album. Love
Yeah,
the album cover. I love that art
it's
so
cool.
much. That
Yeah,
blue and the gold, and it's such a cool,
yeah, it's
cool
really cool.
design.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. Yeah, but I'll jump into my number 4 if that's cool.
Yeah, man.
A repeat band from last week. I actually have 2 repeat bands from last week, which is hilarious because bands don't usually put albums out back to back years. The reason this one was put out back-to-back years because it was potentially going to be a double album at first, and the band decided to split it into two. And I've teased you enough. I'm talking about Radiohead and their album Amnesiac came out in 2001. Um, People say that Kid A, this one I talked about last week, is like the best of the best Radiohead, and Amnesiac was kind of like its bro that like nobody cared about. I love it. I think it's way better than Kid A. It's more of a band sound, less experimental. Um, really cool stuff. But I want to talk about one song in particular for this one. It's Pyramid Song. It's the second track on the album. I looked it up last night. 3 different music publications, Rolling Stone included, named it one of the best 300 songs of that entire decade.
Wow.
I mean, it was a big deal, and it's the weirdest time signature. And I want to talk to you about this because I know you're interested in cool time signatures, being a big proud guy. I remember like you actually said that Radiohead was like technically qualified as like some kind of progressive. Do you remember what that was?
Yeah, like basically I did my personal top 5 from my music library from 2000 to 2006, and I got to 2007. It was kind of a thin year for me, and I got really worried that I was like missing other great music out there. So I went back and like restarted, and I was plowing through a whole bunch of resources, the Billboard charts, some Wikipedia stuff, NPR listener picks, a local radio station, WNCW, sponsored by WNCW, that we listened to a lot growing up. And finally, there's a progressive website called the Prague Archives. And they don't have every single Radiohead album like listed as progressive rock, but some of their really big ones are listed on there. Kid A is on there, In Rainbows is on there. So I was joking with you because I know that prog rock's not your favorite genre. I was like, oh, yeah. Well, it turns out.
Yeah, you got me. I was like, maybe it's electronic progressive. Anyways, so I looked up, I've been listening to the song for years, not since 2001, but I don't remember when I discovered Radiohead. But I just sit there and try to and just think really hard about what's going on. I'm like, what is this madness? And when the drums come in like halfway through the song, it's the coolest thing ever. It doesn't make sense. It's just really weird drum fill that gets into the song. I guess it's kind of like slow jazzy. I don't know. But I looked it up to see what time signature it was in. It's a huge debate. Like nobody knows really, but I found the best thing that I could find. So if you're interested in listening to Pyramid Song and you know anything about time signatures, I thought this was really interesting. So the song is technically in 4/4, and you would have no idea because it's so weird. Like the piano starts on like a 3 or something wacky, and the vocals are kind of like, I don't know, swinging or something. But it says the drums technically play in 4/4, 1 bar is in 7/4, and 1 bar is in 9/4, which together line up to technically a 4/4.
Makes 16.
So it's 7/4, 9/4, like back and forth. But like the way all the instruments play against each other sounds so weird. And like it sounds like it wouldn't work, but it's really like cohesive and cool sounding, and it makes you sit there and think, and I like that.
That's sweet, man.
So yeah, as I listen to it again, I'm like trying to count.
Yeah, I actually really like, I know you sent me some, not to like foreshadow a band that I know you're going to talk about in some later episodes, but I know it's kind of in similar conversations we've had about the drummer in Death Cab for Cutie, of how like they may not necessarily use unorthodox time signatures, but the way that they fit their music into traditional times is really interesting.
Yep. So I know it makes a huge difference because it sounds like something new. Like mix it up when you can. It sounds really cool.
Yeah.
But yeah, so just that one song I would suggest looking into. Otherwise, the album is super weird, really weird. Hated it the first time I heard it. Grew on me more and more I listened to it. Ended up being one of my favorite Radiohead albums. So Amnesiac.
So I'm curious. To ask you. So you mentioned like it grew on you. So like how long was that process? Because like you didn't like it at all the first time you heard it, and then like what pulled you back to it?
Yeah, well, the first Radiohead album I really listened to was OK Computer, and that one was way more approachable, like standard songwriting with some cool weird stuff in. And this one was just like are these even songs? Like robot voices and like loops and stuff. Like, this is terrible. But that's a good question. Um, I'd say it took me a while. Like, this is one of those albums that I would never come back to, just because the first time I listened to it, I was like, eh.
Mm.
And then like over time you come back to it and you're like, oh, okay, that song's pretty cool. That song's pretty cool. Okay, there's some pretty good songs. They're like, oh, every song's pretty cool. So yeah, it was definitely a little bit of time, but nothing too crazy because I'm a Radiohead fan, so
Yeah.
forced myself to like it at least.
Well, it's interesting, and I think you kind of hit on it earlier, like, and we talked about this last time, when a band has a significant sound change from one album to the next, it's a really jarring experience.
Mhm.
And sometimes you have that negative reaction and it never goes away. Like,
Yeah.
I know I've had that with certain bands where it's like, oh man, the last album sounded like this and I loved it, and this one just does not, and like I never got over it. But
Yep.
then there are some bands too, like you're saying, where you listen to it the first time and you're like, what is this? Like, it's just not what I was hoping it would be. And then you come
Mhm.
back to it, however much time it is, a month later, a year later, and you kind of hear it with new ears, and you're like, now that I got over that initial negative reaction
I
and
know.
I can actually listen to this for what it is, it's pretty cool.
I always think of Muse when I think of that, because they're a really hardcore rock band for their first couple albums, and they started getting a little more poppy, a little more classical even. And I was reading, I think it was from Matt Bellamy directly, the singer from Muse, Supermassive Black Hole. You remember how big that song was for them?
Mm-hmm.
He said that everybody hated it. Like, the Muse fans hated it when that song came out. And when they played at shows, people would like boo him and stuff. And like he said, he's like, we always write songs that are popular 4 or 5 years later, because now it's one of their biggest like bangers. And when they played at shows, it's everybody's favorite song.
Mm.
So it's kind of funny. You just got to give it a little time
Yeah.
for people for people to calm down.
There's a band that I like a lot, and I'll talk about them in a later year. House of Heroes, and their singer Tim Skipper has, in an interview, he's pretty much said people don't like our albums when they come out.
You're right. Yeah.
It takes a while for people to like
Mhm.
adjust to what we're doing, and
Yep.
they're a band like Muse. Like, I very much liked the direction that they went in when they kind of shifted. House of Heroes, the band that I just mentioned, I really, really liked the sound of their first album. When they shifted away from it, I was kind of like, ah. But yeah,
I mean,
always interesting.
you can't just do the same thing over and over again. It gets old. It's got to
Yeah.
get old for the bands. Uh, Maybe not for the Strokes. They should have kept their sound. All right, I'll go into my number 3, which is your number 5, so we can talk about this one together.
Sounds good.
It is my favorite Audio Adrenaline album, Lift. So awesome. And I've been talking a lot, so I'll let you start this one off.
Oh, you're good, man. Yeah, I mean, it's probably either my second or third favorite Audio Adrenaline record. It's the first one. Well, like, if you're an Audio Adrenaline fan, you know this. If you're not, they went through already had one very significant sound change. They went from kind of like a rap rock group. They shifted to like old school, like kind of classic rock style, 70s style rock, and that was what they ended up kind of sticking with for a while. And this is the first album where they kind of like, well, I guess they did in the previous one a little bit, but this one especially, they really kind of shifted away from the classic rock and more to a little bit more of a modern sound. I don't know if you'd agree with that.
Oh yeah, for
Um,
sure.
and a big part of that was they changed guitarists in the late 90s, and their new guitarist, Tyler Burkham, started writing a lot of the music for them. And he sings quite a bit on this album as well. And he almost became sort of a co-lead singer for them as the band went on. But yeah, I have sort of, like we've talked about, some mixed feelings about bands sort of changing sounds and changing directions. I think Lift works really, really well for Audio Adrenaline.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, let's see, I've got the track list over here. Especially like, oh gosh, these first 4 songs, they're just so cool.
Killer.
Like, busting out of the gates with You Amaze Me, with that great the awesome vocal interplay between Mark Stewart and Tyler Burkham. I'm Alive, that like real driving rock song, beautiful, kind of that goofy pop rock, very fun. Ocean Floor, like very cool rock ballad. Yeah, great music, great music.
Yeah, the whole album's awesome. And for people who think that Audio Adrenaline is this like top 40 pop band, I don't think they have any original members left. I think they still call themselves Audio Adrenaline. It's terrible.
Yeah,
Like, go back to this stuff. They were a rock and roll band. And that's why Christian music was so much cooler back in the early 2000s. I mean, this is straight up rock and roll. Like, you don't have to be a Christian to enjoy this. I mean, great riffs, great melodies. It's awesome. It's just good old rock music.
yeah, agreed, man. And I think like when Christian music sort of started to come around in the 70s and 80s, it was like when you go back and listen to that stuff, it was really, really goofy. It was very like purposefully separate from like kind of the pop and rock music that was around at that time. And then in the 90s, especially like the mid to late 90s, like Christian music just stopped being tied to a genre, and a Christian band could come out and just be like really, really different, and fans really latched onto it because like there wasn't like, oh, Christian music should sound like this. And Audio Adrenaline is one, like they really funneled into that rock and roll sound, and nobody else was doing it. And several bands started sort of copying them because they did so well with it. And I know last time we talked about the Supertones too. That's kind of like ska, punk, pop, like very genre bending. I got a band that I'm talking about today that's like very like sort of not what you'd consider to be a popular genre. But yeah, totally agree with you. It was a really cool time in Christian music, just in the sense that like you could make something that was very different or very separate from pop music, and it would be really popular, and they just didn't have a studio telling them like, no, your music has to sound like this, or you need to be in like this box or this bubble, or yeah.
Yep. And Audio Adrenaline was and is still one of my favorite bands. I forget what year, until up to whatever year. Um, and the Supertones was my other favorite band. And I'm sure you remember when they joined forces for the song Blitz.
Oh yeah.
It's like a dream come true. Like your two favorite bands doing a song, and it was like kind of a funny song, but it was awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah. But great memories.
Well, I want to ask you, so I know when we were kids, we watched all the time. Audio Adrenaline had a DVD that went along with this album, the Lift DVD.
I still have it.
Oh, do you really?
Yeah, I still have it.
Nice. Do you have any like favorites or memories or tidbits from that you want to talk about?
Oh, it was funny DVD. It was kind of like showed them like on the road and stuff. And they're like, I just thought it was kind of funny how normal they were. They're like, there's like shots of them like eating at Burger King, like stuff like that. And I remember the funniest thing that sticks out to me, they had a section where they did pranks on that DVD. Do you remember that?
Yep.
And keeping it G-rated, when somebody would say, "Oh my God," they would beep it out. They'd be like, "Oh my." So it was a good DVD, and it had all the music videos and stuff. It was fun getting a little behind the scenes. I like when bands do that.
Yeah,
it was cool. Yeah,
I still, every single time I see the Candy Swedish Fish, I still think about that DVD because their bass player Will McGinnis, they asked him, if you could be any kind of fish, what would you be? And he says, a Swedish fish. And I think of that every single time I see that Candy.
I forgot about that. That's great.
He was so funny on that DVD, especially because there was that shot where like they were like out in the field and with all that tall grass, and he stands up and he's just got that like crap and like dirt like all taped to his head and stuck to his face. He's going like the beauty of nature all around.
Classic. Yeah, they just seem like cool guys, and they're all really funny. And their drummer Ben Sissel ended up doing some really cool throwback videos on YouTube, like archive footage and stuff.
Those were awesome.
Them playing like toy instruments at live concerts and like all this really weird stuff. So yeah, it's fun.
I love the one where he did. I know last time you were talking about Eels, when they play live, like very often they like play a song different kind of every time they tour it.
Yeah.
And I know one of my favorite videos that Ben Sissel did was Audio Adrenaline played their song "We're a Band" at every single show. And do you remember that one where he super cut it? He took like every single tour and like all the different versions and mixed them together, and it was really cool.
Yeah, awesome.
Well, nice. I'll just mention this one before I move on to my number 4. So I mentioned that I lead worship at a church, and there's a few on this album that we play relatively frequently at church. You know, even this album being 20 years old, you know, maybe once a year or so we'll bust one of these out. Ocean Floor, great song. Speak to Me is one that we play at church a lot. My wife sings that one. It's a great tune. And Tremble, the very last track. Very different song for Audio Adrenaline. Very kind of like reflective, sort of synth driven, very soft and really never gets loud. Very kind of powerful imagery in very few words in that one. So cool stuff going on there. I'll mention too.
Actually, sorry.
Oh, I think you're about to say the same thing that I was going to say. Go ahead.
About Blue Turnip, possibly. Yeah, we used to play Ocean Floor. Is that what you're going to say?
Yeah.
Nice. Yeah, we used to play Ocean Floor frequently.
Yeah.
It was like one of our go-tos. Yeah.
Back when we could play like a little bit more ambitious music. That one's got the key change in the bridge, and Andy would play the little guitar line. And
did I used to sing the chorus? Or like
I think so. Yeah.
I think I did, and then I decided I didn't want to anymore. Because I went through my phase where I didn't want to sing anymore. I was like, screw this. I just want to play the drums. Stop making me sing.
Because the chorus goes back and forth. There's like the Tyler Burkham part, and then the Mark. That was the part that I was just saying, like they're all behind.
Yeah. Classic Mark Stewart. There's one thing all right. He's just like, all right. In like every other song, you could just tell like he needs an instrument. Like give this guy an instrument. He's kind of like Robert Plant, just like does really like just has to get something in just because they get bored. Like that I don't know. This reminded me of that Led Zeppelin song. It's on Led Zeppelin 1, where the guitar's playing stuff and then Robert Plant is repeating what the guitar's doing. It's like it's like like, get this man a harmonica or something.
Yeah, and that one, gosh, I know what song you're talking about because I can hear it too. Because I remember it always annoys me because that was like, you know, back in the 70s, a lot of times they laid down like sort of the ghost track that they would record along with. And you can hear the ghost track in the background is like off from what they were recording. And so like you hear the guitar and then you like hear the little bit of the ghost track back there. And then Robert playing, you're like, stop it, make it stop.
Classic.
There you go. So now we're talking bad about Led Zeppelin, so everybody will love us now.
Yeah.
All right, cool. And that's why you listen to podcasts, man, is for the tangents. We started off talking about a record. Who knows where we're gonna go?
Yeah, that's right.
It's right in the title, guys. Bad podcast. All right. So as Brian mentioned, that was his number 3, Lift by Audio Adrenaline. It was my number 5. And just to recap Brian's 5, 4, 3 for you, he had number 5, Is This It by The Strokes. Number 4, Amnesia by Radiohead. And number 3, Lift by Audio Adrenaline. And as we mentioned,
it's Amnesiac.
Oh, I'm so sorry. Amnesiac. Dude. I have that written down and I wrote it wrong. I said
everybody's going to be so mad. This is a bad couple of minutes here.
The Zeppelin fans and the Radiohead fans. Oh, man.
It's all right.
My bad. All right. So as I mentioned, number 5 is Lift by Audio Adrenaline for me. And my number 4 album is a mouthful, The Anatomy of the Tongue in Cheek by the band Reliant K. We talked about nostalgia already today. And this is definitely an album that is like very nostalgic for me. And every time I went back and listened to it, I would kind of try and tell myself, like, I got to find a reason to get this album off of my top 5. Like, I feel like it's not serious enough. Like it's not as high quality as like recording wise as some of the other stuff that's on here. But every time I went back and listened to it and would compare it to something else that I was considering, I kept being like, I really love this. It's so much fun. And not only did I end up keeping it in my top 5, I ended up putting it in the 4 slot. So it wasn't it ended up bumping up because the more I listened to it, I was just like, it's just so fun. It's so fun. So this is the sophomore release by Reliant K. Their first album, I think anybody would tell you, is not good. Like it's just it's a very much like a they weren't ready to record an album yet album. And so this is kind of like, in my opinion, their first like real record, like when they actually had some like really solid songs. And you can probably tell from the title, Anatomy of the Tongue in Cheek, it's pretty goofy. I'd say it's probably about 50-50, like quote unquote serious songs and quote unquote joke songs. And it's got 17 tracks. There's a lot of music on here. Yeah, just like I said, it's super, super fun. It's kind of like a pop punk sort of sound. Very raw, like they hadn't quite honed in like what would go on to make some of like their really great later music, like 3 to 5, 6 years from this point. But yeah, I mean, it's got their, like, to talk about the big hit, Sadie Hawkins Dance. That was kind of the song that put them on the map, like kind of a goofy, fun song about like being nervous about an upcoming dance and excited about it. But like some of these song titles, like you'll hear, like they're very goofy. Like maybe it's Maybelline, uh, uh, May the Horse Be With You, Breakfast at Timpani's, Failure to Excommunicate. Like it's pretty goofy stuff, but it's just really fun. I like too how they have very sudden changes. Like they'll very suddenly change a tempo or a style, like even go from a verse to a pre-chorus to a chorus. But it works pretty well. But yeah, a couple memories I have from this, or one specific memory I have from this one is, I don't know if you remember this or not. Do you remember when we were kids, you and I went to Doe River Gorge?
Oh yeah.
Yeah, and if you don't know it, it was like a Christian youth camp, like nature outdoors thing, and just like a beautiful area of Tennessee. And do you remember? I think I only went once. Did you go more than once? Or
I went once.
you went once?
Yeah.
And we went the same year, right?
No, I
No.
went. I actually, because I had my baseball schedule made it so I couldn't go with our church group. So one of my buddies went like rando.
Gotcha.
But
Gotcha.
yeah, I don't think you were there.
I don't. That sounds right when you mentioned
Yeah.
it. Yeah, but I think it's from your when you went, the DVD that you got like at the end of it.
Yes.
The second track on this album was like the song that played for one of like the reels that played on the DVD. Pressing On, it's called.
Yeah, I remember that.
Yeah, and I remember we watched that so many times because I think your buddy was on that like big inflatable water thing that he got launched way up into the
shot
air.
him in the sky.
Yeah. And so that's what when I turn on this album, like talking about like nostalgia and memories, that's the first thing that always pops into my head is that DVD in Doe River Gorge.
Well, it's cool that you mentioned that because music does that. You'll hear something and it'll take you back to a place. It's crazy. Really cool.
Yeah. And just mention one more thing about this album too before I move on. So I mentioned that I worship at a church, and the 7th track from this album, Those Words Are Not Enough. We do that at my church sometimes as well. The verse is a little goofy, but the chorus I've always found to be very, very meaningful to me. I lay my life before you and I'm not getting up. Father, how I adore you. Those words are not enough. Just kind of the repetition of that. Yeah, very, very, very meaningful, cool stuff there. All right, cool. Well, moving on. My number 3 album is kind of an unusual one. 2001. Yeah, this was kind of a funky year for me for looking at these albums and stuff. So my number 3 album is Sonic Praise by Sonic Flood, and this is kind of an interesting album in a couple ways. One, of the entire 2000 through 2020, I only have 3 live albums that I've chosen for my top 5, and this is one of them. This is a live album. And the other thing that's pretty interesting about this is of 11 songs on here, only 3 of them are originals. The rest are covers. And I kind of struggle with that, in picking the albums. I'm like, man, if there's this many covers, is this an okay album to pick? I don't know. But I ended up deciding yes, because in my opinion, the versions of these songs that these guys do on this record are the best recordings of these songs that are out there. They basically took like a lot of Christian music from the 90s that basically like the songs had good bones, like, you know, they had a great chorus, a catchy, you know, verse or good hook or whatever, but they just had kind of like goofier, campy recordings, and they really gave them like very like solid, proper treatment. Like they took like "Open the Eyes of My Heart," "I Want to Know You," "Did You Feel the Mountains Tremble," "Before the Throne of God Above." Like they took these songs that had been around for a long time, and they really gave them like a proper treatment that they hadn't been given before, because the recordings, the original studio recordings of those songs by the artists, were just kind of very goofy, kind of. And they really rock it up and do some cool arrangements. Yeah, and the three originals that are on there are all three by far better than the studio recordings that Sonic Flood put out as well, like "Carried Away," "Holy One." Actually, are those the only two originals? Those might be the only two originals, "Carried Away" and "Holy One." But both of those are just like phenomenal, phenomenal recordings of those songs, that are even better than the studio recordings that they put out a year or two earlier. So yeah, "Sonic
Yeah,
Praise" by Sonic
they're
Flood.
they're really good. Actually, when I saw that album, I don't know, I blanked. I was like, who is Sonic Flood? And then I clicked through some of the songs that you added to our playlist, and it got back to me. I remembered. I was like, oh yeah, Sonic Flood, and it's awesome. We used to listen to it all the time. It's really,
Yeah,
really good stuff. Yeah, nice pick.
and I know in the intro to that record, I don't know where they were playing. I should have known this, but the guy comes out and he has such a weird accent. It sounds like almost like French or some sort of like, yeah, not like a traditional European accent. You can barely understand him, but he's trying to describe the band to the audience. And the only word that you can really hear him say is the word Radiohead. He's like, Radiohead, Sonic Flood. And you're like, oh, I guess maybe they sound a little bit like Radiohead. I don't know.
That's hilarious.
But,
Nice.
well, there we go. All right. Well, we'll turn it over to you for your number 2 album,
Yeah,
Ryan.
brings me to my number 2, another repeat artist from last week. Not because it was supposed to be a double album, because this band puts out an album like every single year. My favorite band, Eels, and their album Soul Jacker comes in at my number 2 for 2001. This one, we've been talking about how bands change things up. This is a big change for them. It's more of a rock and roll album. Heavy electric guitars, a couple mellower ones mixed in. You hear a lot of like old school Beck influence on this one, I think. Um, and this is an album's more character driven, whereas their lead singer would write about his life mostly in his first 3 albums. So it's like a big change for them. And the interesting thing about Eels is this is the first album where they changed the players in their band. Like I think it was basically a completely different band. And Eels is basically and he'll just pick different people to play on his albums every album. They had like a core 3 to start, but it's totally different now. He'll bring people back from like albums back in the day and put them on a new one, just like whoever's around, pretty much is what it sounds like. So this one had some new guys on it, very different sound, very much rock and roll, a lot of cool riffs. Um, and I think this one, interestingly enough, that nobody wanted to release it in the US because it didn't have a single. So I think they released it in Japan first, and then it came out in America like a few months later, and actually ended up having one of their biggest hit songs on it. Funny enough, "Fresh Feeling." But yeah, another diss for the Eels, but they did what they wanted because that's what makes them happy. I think that's why they're a great band. They don't sell out. They do what they want to do, even if that means not making as much money. And I think this album is a great example of it. But yeah, it's really good. It rocks for sure.
Awesome. Yeah, I know.
Yeah,
My Eels discography is pretty spotty, but I know I have "Bus Stop Oxford." That's a great tune that I know is on
yeah,
this
it's a
one.
cool one. Yeah, And I remember we had that live album growing up, live at Town Hall, like with
Mm-hmm.
strings, Eels with strings. That's another really good example of how different they play their songs live. Because you listen to Bus Stop Boxer on here, it's a rock song. You listen to it live with strings, it's like a mellow, like pretty song.
Yeah.
So it's pretty cool. Um, I guess my three of my favorites are Friendly Ghost, Teenage Witch, and Bus Stop Boxer, and they're actually all back to back to back. Um, yeah, so I'd recommend checking those out.
Sweet.
But
Check the playlist, man. It's in the link below, Spotify playlist,
yeah,
or
that's
I think
right.
at the beginning of the video, I put a YouTube playlist link up in the corner as well. So
Yeah, I don't want to talk too much about Eels because they have 13 studio albums, and I picked like all of them. So I want to save some stuff for later. But they even went through a span where they put out 3 albums in less than 2 years. And they crank them.
nice.
They crank them.
That's always great for the fans, man. I know when you get that artist that's pumping out that much music
Yeah,
for you, it's like, all right.
it's awesome. Yeah, man. But
Sweet.
yeah, you want to get into your number two?
Sure. All right. So my number two album from 2001 is Bridge Across Forever by Transatlantic. So this is you mentioned the prog rock earlier. This is as pretty much as prog as it gets. So Transatlantic is a progressive rock supergroup. At the time, back in 2001, well, it's the same members, but these are the bands they were in at the time. Neil Morse was coming over from Spock's Beard. Royna Stolt was coming over and playing the guitar. He was from the Flower Kings. Pete Trewavas was there from Marillion, and Mike Portnoy was there from Dream Theater. And they had done one album together, I think 1 year earlier. And it was very much like they were sort of getting to know each other sort of album. Like there's a cover on there, and the styles kind of bounce all over the place a little bit. And this one they came back, and this is a concept album, and it is just really cohesive. Great record. It's probably my second favorite Transatlantic album. Um, it's only 4 songs. They're all packed. We got their opening track, "Duel with the Devil." It's like 25-ish minutes. Starts off with kind of like almost like a haunting string duet, and then gets into just like the cool thing about Transatlantic is even though it's very progressive, you just get like catchy chorus after catchy chorus. So there'll be like some really interesting like sections or different time signatures, and it gets to the chorus and just gets stuck in your head. Um, this one probably has one of my favorite Transatlantic songs on there, "Sweet Charlotte Pike." It's their second track. I know it's a little bit of a polarizing track for the fan base because it's kind of a goofy little song. I say little, it's like 14 minutes long. But like it's kind of filled with inside jokes, and like it starts off with this kind of they're all just like sort of jamming in the studio, and they stop in the middle and do that old like "what's up," like that old thing from like that old Super Bowl commercial or whatever that was.
Yeah.
And so like there's some goofy stuff in there, but like there's like really Beatles heavy influence in there, but also some really proggy stuff. And
Nice.
then the last track on there, "Stranger in Your Soul," very common for both the band and for Neil Morse to play that one as an encore for at his concerts, live shows for a good long while. Yeah,
Sweet.
just some great progressive rock from a great progressive rock super group
Yeah.
right there.
And Kyle's the progressive rock man, so believe what he says. I'm not I'm not a big prog rock fan. Like I don't sit down and listen to it, but I'm a big prog rock drummer fan. And I know you said it's Portnoy.
Mm-hmm.
Dude is on another level. Guy's amazing. He played I like Avenged Sevenfold a lot, and the Rev, their drummer who ended up dying really young, I think from like a drug overdose. But he Portnoy took over um, on the album after he died, and dude is unbelievable. I know he's played in tons of bands. You probably know more than I do, but I know
We
that guy is amazing.
Yeah, and he plays with everybody. Yeah, it's
Yeah, that's probably
yeah.
why, because he's like one of the best.
Yeah.
So
He's been putting out some solo stuff more like during the pandemic. He put out some singles and some covers, and where he's playing more instruments, and his daughter sings with him some. And so yeah, it's been. I know he covered a John Lennon song this summer or past year, and a Jellyfish song, which is another band that I like. But yeah, cool dude for sure.
Heck yeah.
And Neil Morse, Brian, you mentioned that the Eels is on your list a lot. Neil Morse, this is his first appearance on my top fives, but we'll be seeing a lot of him down the road.
Nice. Heck yeah.
Various bands that he's in and solo records that he's put out. So yeah,
Nice.
he's one of my guys for sure.
Sweetness.
Well, all right. Everybody's been waiting on the edge of their seats. We baited them last time. We said that the number one album from 2001 was a North Carolina artist, and it's the only year in our whole discography that we've picked that you and I picked the same number one album. And that album is Rockin' the Suburbs by Ben Folds.
It's so good.
I want to let you start with this one because when you sent me your list, I was shocked that you picked it. Like, I didn't know that you liked this album this much. So, hit me with some stuff that you think about it.
I'll get this out of the way. Not a Ben Folds fan. Apologize. And I'd always liked some of his songs. I'm like, okay, yeah, I can dig this every now and then. And our sister is a huge Ben Folds fan. Like, she knows all the words to all of his songs. Been to like so many of his concerts. I don't know how many. So I texted her. Like, I heard, like I said, I was hearing some songs I was liking, hearing some that I wasn't liking. So I texted Paige, our sister, and I was like, "What's your favorite Ben Folds album?" I was like, I want to try to dig a little deeper and listen to him. And she said, "Rockin' the Suburbs." I was like, all right, whatever. So I downloaded it. I was like, this is gonna suck. Ben Folds, not a fan. And the first song, Annie Waits, I was like, okay, this is pretty good. And then the next song is Zach and Sarah, and I'm like, oh yeah, this is even better. And then Still Fighting It, the third song, ended up being one of my favorite songs by any band ever. I think it's like a perfect song. And just like every song is good. Like, every single song is a gem. I love the whole thing. So yeah, that's kind of how it happened. I asked Paige what to listen to. She told me this one, and she nailed it. Nice. I texted her, and I was like, dude, this is amazing. Like, this is from 2001, and I just listened to it probably last year for the first time, and I listen to it all the time. I love it.
That's awesome, man. Yeah, I'm a very big Ben Folds fan, and this is my favorite Ben Folds album as well. And it's funny you mentioned that Paige, our sister, was the one that got you into this. My wife, Katie, back when we were dating, she got really into him, and she made me a mix CD of just like a bunch of different of his stuff. And I went to her and I was like, these are like my 6 or 7 favorites from this CD. And she was like, oh, they're all from Rockin' the Suburbs.
Wow.
And I was like, these songs are so good. And this is his first solo album. This is the one where, he was with the Ben Folds 5 in the 90s. And they have some really, really awesome music. They sort of went on hiatus. And this was the very first record that he did as solo artist, Ben Folds, and it's unreal. I mean,
it's amazing.
I'd categorize it as a masterpiece.
I agree. Like seriously, you can listen through the whole thing, and it's like perfection. The songs are constructed so well. I don't know how to explain it. Killer melodies, catchy choruses, like fun songs. It's really good.
Yeah. And I don't, it's kind of I haven't read any interviews with him about it or any like detailed analysis other than just listening to it all the time, but it's like kind of a semi-concept album, I guess. Most of the songs are about like one person or a couple of people, and sort of like something that they're going through. Like you mentioned the first song, Annie Waits, it's kind of a middle-aged woman who's trying to date and she's having a lot of trouble with it. Zach and Sarah, you get the 2 friends, and one of them's kind of normal and one of them's got some kind of problems, and like you go through like all the people in there. Still Fighting, as you mentioned, such a phenomenal song. I mean, yeah, from top to bottom. And one thing that's amazing to me that makes this album stand out, not only as a great collection of songs, but as a great album, all the songs are awesome, and you can listen to any one of them and be like, man, that's a great song. And when you listen to them in a row, you're like, this is really truly a collection. Like, they very much go together. They play off each other very well. There's lots of varying styles and up and downs and highs and lows. Yeah, just I can't say enough about this one. This one's
the art of the album, like it was so much more prominent back in the day, because now it's all about buying singles on iTunes. So I'm glad you mentioned that. This is an album you have to listen to all the way through. You just have to. It's just one of those that's that good that you got to listen to it.
yeah.
And like when we were picking songs for our playlist, we picked 3 of our favorites. Is how we do it. It was hard.
Yeah.
Like I picked Zach and Sarah Still Fighting It and Gone, but I was just looking through it. Fired is one of my favorite songs too.
Such an awesome song.
The Luckiest, the last song, I think that was a mega hit for him. If I'm right about
Still
that.
Fighting It and The Luckiest, yeah, we're both definitely the 2 most popular ones from this one.
Yeah, but
yeah, I agree with you.
Good.
I agree with, and like you, because you started the playlist and you picked 3, and so you had already crossed 3 off the list, and I had 3 to pick, and it was hard for me too.
Yeah.
I was like, oh man, they're like Brian already narrowed it down for me some, and I still am having trouble picking.
Yeah.
But
yeah, our listeners need to know that this album's like that good, because like I said, I wouldn't call myself a Ben Folds fan, and you can't say that for a lot of bands. You're like, I don't really like this guy, but this album's awesome. I think it's phenomenal.
I agree, man. I can't say enough good things. And like I said, I'm a big Ben Folds fan. I like a lot of his stuff. But this one is on another plane. This is a real masterpiece.
Yep, no doubt.
Well, all right. I'll just count back through the top 5, and I'll say all the albums correctly this time. So, Brian's top 5, we had "Is This It" by The Strokes, "Amnesiac" by Radiohead, "Lift" by Audio Adrenaline, "Soul Jacker" by Eels, and "Rockin' the Suburbs" by Ben Folds. And my top 5, we had "Lift" by Audio Adrenaline, "The Anatomy of the Tongue in Cheek" by Reliant K, "Sonic Praise" by Sonic Flood, "Bridge Across Forever" by Transatlantic, and "Rockin' the Suburbs" by Ben Folds. Another year down, man.
Another year down. How many to go?
18? Something like that.
Yeah. Sweet.
Well, last time we gave you a little preview for the following episode. So we mentioned that we really don't have all that much music in common going through all 21 of these years. But most of the music that we have in common is packed in these first 3, 2000 to 2002. And 2002 is the year that you and I have the most in common.
Really?
I believe so, if I remember correctly. Well, I'm not going to pull it up now. But I think that we have the most in common in 2002.
Yeah, I'm looking at it. I know we have at least 2 in common.
Yeah. We did have 2 this year, so maybe it's the same. But
still the most.
Yeah, it's tied for the most.
Sweet.
Well, thank you guys so much for listening. Hopefully we've given you some cool music to listen to if you haven't heard it, and we'd just like to go back through all of our sponsors. No, I'm just kidding.
Taco Bell.
I don't even remember them all. It was like,
yeah, there's a lot.
We should have probably mentioned Mike Portnoy as a sponsor as well, because we talked about him.
Oh yeah, definitely a sponsor.
Well, all right, guys. Thanks so much for tuning into another edition of Blue Turnip's Bad Podcast about good music. We will be back next time and talk about the year 2002.
All right. Sounds good. Catch you next time.
See you guys.